I grew up in American Fork. Now I live in Provo. And in between, I've lived in Washington, D.C., where I went to graduate school, did my doctorate there. And I lived in Houston, Texas for 4 years doing my postdoc. And I just got back from almost a year in China, where I was on sabbatical doing research there. Before I went, I've done lots of work on transcriptional regulation and gene control of gene expression. But I wanted to learn about the gut microbiome, which is all the bacteria that grows in the gut. And I worked in a lab where they were studying how the gut microbiota influences diabetes and obesity and heart disease. And I did some work there where we looked at the relationship between the gut microbiota and behavioral changes like anxiety and depression and reactions to stress. So it turned out really exciting, and I'm fascinated with it, and I'll be doing a lot more of that now back in my lab here. Study of the gut microbiota is very interesting to me, partly because of the connections with the word of wisdom, because what you eat has a huge influence on the kind of bacteria that thrive in the gut. And things that are encouraged by the word of wisdom tend to be the same foods that promote the growth of healthy and beneficial gut microbiota. I love working with students, with the undergraduates especially. When I was an undergrad at BYU, I worked in a research lab and got to be an author on a paper, and it made such a difference going forward to have had my name as an author on a research publication. It opened doors getting into graduate school, getting research funding, my postdoc, and it kind of snowballed. And so looking back, I realized how beneficial that was for me, that professor, it was actually Dr. Robert Segmiller, who's just recently retired from BYU, but how much a difference it made to me to be able to work in his lab, and I wanted to do that same thing for other students when I got here. My lab right now has two major areas of focus because I am just starting a focus on the gut microbiota. That's been developing over the past year, and then I have the work I was doing before I left, which is focused on a protein we discovered in my lab, but the version of the protein we found has a completely different function. It goes to the nucleus of the cell it's made in, and we've been using animal studies where we mutated just that version of the protein, and we're able to show that that protein plays an important role in immune function, and also in skeletal muscle function, and in learning and memory. So it seems like really almost unrelated activities of the body, but they are related in that they all depend on intracellular calcium. Intracellular meaning within the cell, movement of calcium. So in all these different tissues, calcium movement inside the cell is messed up, and it affects learning and memory. And it affects muscle contractions, and it affects immune response. So that's the other thing that we're focused on, is understanding how that protein does what it does in the nucleus. When I was a freshman student here at BYU, I was having such a hard time choosing a major. I was taking all my GE and trying the different classes, but I just felt all the time like I was going to be bored. Like I would sit in a class and think, if I had to do this all day, every day, I would go crazy. In lots of different classes, I felt that way. And then I heard a talk one day, a presentation by a professor of microbiology, and it was just a one day, he visited a class I was in and made this big presentation, and he talked about gene therapy and how sometime down the road we would be able to cut genes and paste them back together and treat diseases that way. And I sat there in that class thinking, now that is something that I would never get bored of doing. I could do that every day, and it would always be something new, always something interesting, always something to learn. And I changed my major that day to microbiology. And I've been on that path ever since, never regretted it. And it's been true, I've never been bored. There's always something new to learn.